It's 9 a.m. here in New York. I'm Maggie Lake, live at the New York Stock Exchange. Coming up this hour, containing the spread, fears ease over the world's biggest ever hack attack. A show of military might by North Korea casts a shadow over China's moment on the world economic stage. And America's next top cop, the White House gets ready to name its choice to lead the FBI as the firestorm over Comey continues. It was the biggest hack attack the world has ever seen, but attempts to stop the virus spreading appear to be working. Companies and government agencies braced themselves for trouble on Monday as staff returned to work. But so far, there have been fewer new victims than feared. But as millions of people at workplaces in the U.S. log on again, investigators warn the attack is still a live threat. The virus has been detected in at least 150 countries, infecting 200,000 machines. In a moment, we'll talk you through exactly what ransomware is and what to watch out for. But first, let's get the latest developments with Claire Sebastian. And Claire, give us a status report. What kind of disruption are we seeing?
Well, as you say, Maggie, the situation appears to have stabilized despite those widespread fears over the weekend that Monday morning could bring a huge surge in new infections. That does not appear to have materialized. Europol, which is the European Union's law enforcement agency, calling this a success, saying that it looks like many people have been updating their machines, which obviously functions a bit like an immunization against this virus. But this was still an attack on an unprecedented scale, a huge variety of companies, of government agencies affected, everything from international shipping company FedEx to Chinese universities to the National Health Service in the UK. Most people telling us this morning that the situation is returning to normal. FedEx tell me this morning that they are seeing normal operations. We know that the Russian Interior Ministry managed to localize the virus to 1,000 computers, 1% of its computers, it said, on Friday. And the NHS in the UK says that by mid-afternoon on Saturday, most of its systems were back to normal. We do know one French car maker, Renault, says that one of its plants in northern France, a fairly big one, is still closed, so that, you still are seeing some disruptions. This is still out there. It's simply the fact that the infection rate has slowed. So it's still a time to be vigilant, Maggie. And experts are saying if it does happen, do not pay. That simply perpetuates this criminal enterprise and does not guarantee that you will find your files decrypted.
Yeah, that's right. And it seems like a lot of people were following that, whether they intended to or not, and were not paying up. Samuel, the big question is, do we know who's responsible? Presumably, as long as they are at large, they could strike again.
It's interesting because usually the cyber experts tell us this looks like it's coming from China if it's corporate espionage, Russia many times they allege when it's governmental espionage. But in this case, you see China and Russia are some of the biggest victims. So they're ruling out nation states and governments, the experts, and they believe it's in all likelihood a small group of cyber criminals. And they actually think that in this case, they'll probably will be brought to justice because they've seen some not so mature acts, let's say, and some of what they've done, even in their code. It doesn't look like they're incredibly sophisticated people. And because so many countries are targeted here, if not all of them, it makes people believe that at the end of the day, when they can finally get close to who it is, when they can finally point that finger, they actually might have buy-in from other governments from around the world to try and prosecute these people. So we don't know who they are yet, and the fact that they're using Bitcoin makes it that much more difficult to trace. Of course, they asked for $300, but they asked for it not in dollars, but in Bitcoin. So it will be difficult. But sooner or later, they find these people, and it's usually a question of whether the place where they are, the government and the country that they're hiding, will protect them or bring them to justice.
Right, and you're right. Maybe we'll see something different this time around. Samuel, interesting. I saw someone interestingly point out that the one area you didn't see affected as much was banking. We know banks have been so concerned about this. They have been the victims or targets of it. So they've done a lot of work in terms of investing in their cybersecurity. What should we learn from this? What can everyone else do when we're talking about ransomware? How is the best way to protect yourself?
Exactly. Banks have worked so hard that it's finally paying off for them, because we know all too many times they've been the targets here. What this all comes down to was a flaw in Windows that actually Microsoft has been trying to fix since March. They've offered it to people, but they haven't updated their computer. So the one takeaway we have from all of this, whether you're an individual, a business, or the hospitals here in the United Kingdom, update Windows. That small annoying pop-up you get in the lower right-hand corner. I'm sure sometimes you're about to go on air, Maggie, and you say, I just don't have time to restart my computer. When you get that, 9 times out of 10, it's a security update, and they're trying to block something that could be dangerous, like this ransomware. So when you get those updates, do them right away. That's the most important part here. And we had businesses that hadn't invested properly in their systems, or they have legacy software which really stops them from updating to Windows. And this is a wake-up call that you've got to update your software to go along with the newer version of Windows so that you avoid a situation like this.
And I think that's what we're seeing in many of these cases, that the software is incompatible if you do the update, and it's something we're really going to have to take a look at. Both Claire and Samuel, thank you so much for bringing us right up to date. Now, Microsoft, the company at the center of this, where the flaw was discovered, the president is warning governments against hoarding details about cracks in cyber defenses. Brad Smith says governments should treat this incident as a wake-up call, saying the virus was identified by and stolen from U.S. intelligence. In a blog post, he wrote, "This attack provides yet another example of why the stockpiling of vulnerabilities by governments is such a problem. Repeatedly, exploits in the hands of governments have leaked into the public domain and caused widespread damage. An equivalent scenario with conventional weapons would be the U.S. military having some of its Tomahawk missiles stolen." Rod Beckstrom is a former director of the U.S. National Cybersecurity Center and senior advisor to the Director of National Intelligence. He's now CEO of Beckstrom, a cybersecurity advisory firm, and he joins us from L.A. Rod, thank you so much for being with us. I'm sure it was an incredibly busy weekend from you, fielding all the questions that we have. Listen, Microsoft's president basically accusing the U.S. government of being careless with weapons of mass destruction. Is he right?
Well, you know, Mr. Smith plays that role at Microsoft, and I've been at the brainstorming table with him at Davos and other places, and it's an important voice that he's expressing. I mean, it's a great frustration and consternation of companies like Microsoft that their technology is being compromised by governments for surveillance activities. And the problem in the world of cyber is that any weapons that any government or offensive cyber group develops is eventually going to be leaked. And if it's still working, then it's going to be used against innocent companies and people. It's an enormous dilemma, and it's the difference between cyber weapons and other weapons in the physical world of the past.
Yeah, easier, you know, it's one thing to haul a missile out through a tunnel or something. These things move around and they're very hard to detect, it would seem. What do you make of the fact that very few people paid the ransom? I mean, when you step back, I know there's a massive manhunt on, but when you step back and look at it, it doesn't look like this was very successful.
You know, it does not look very successful. I computed the numbers roughly before I sat down here for the session, and it looks like less than 1 in 1,000 people whose machine has been locked up by the ransomware has paid the hackers. According to the data that I've seen streaming online, there's an estimate that over $40,000 has been collected. If they receive just 1% of the 200,000 some people that were attacked, it would be like $6 million. So it's a very small number, or maybe that's 1 out of 10,000 that is actually paying the ransom, which is a good thing, because, you know, you don't want to reward criminals for taking action like this. And I strongly urge people, please do not pay the ransom. And if you're having problems recover your machine, just get to an IT service shop or some professionals to help you.
Yeah, you know, some people pointing out, I suppose we shouldn't let our guard down, though, because it just could be that the people, you know, having to pay through Bitcoin is just too complicated, and that's why the people didn't do it. The threat is still real, and I think it shows how someone sitting somewhere can really affect so many computers across the world. Lack of international coordination, is that hampering the effort to track down the perpetrator or perpetrators?
You know, I think most governments will want to cooperate on this one, assuming it's not some of their friendlies that they're using that are, say, gray hats in the middle that do some black hat hacking for governments and or white hats for governments and some criminal activity on their own. I think it's likely governments will cooperate. No one, this has hit so many countries around the world, including U.S. and Russia and others, that I think there will be probably pretty good collaboration. I mean, this may end up being some 15-year-olds in a basement in the Bronx or in Spain or Ukraine. You know, who knows? And I think it's likely they will get caught. They've, you know, they're not super sophisticated, according to, you know, those that have been studying the code and the script that's been discovered on the machines. But I think it's likely they may get found in time.
I suppose that's going to give some people comfort that they're closing in on them. It makes me worry that 15-year-old unsophisticated kids sitting someplace could pull something like this off. I mean, how vulnerable are we? We talk about this all the time, about companies, you know, leaving that one door open, about not spending, not investing enough. We know President Trump convened cabinet meetings about this over the weekend. You know, how far are we lagging behind the bad guys still, Rod?
Well, you know, the reality is this hyper-connected world we've created has billions and billions of devices, and all of them have to be kept up to date, or there's going to be many, you know, vulnerabilities open. I mean, thank goodness it's only 200,000 machines. Microsoft has been pushing aggressively to get these updates out there, and I hope everyone will turn on automatic updates on their machine. That'll help prevent this problem. But the reality is the attack surface of our electronic devices is massive, and it's growing. And the next thing is, again, these weapons that may be very hard to develop by a government or an intelligence agency are extremely easy to copy, and they're much easier to modify than they are to create in the first place. So it means that the hackers that want to use this for criminal purposes have a much easier job than to create some of these weapons in the first place. So that's a dilemma.
It certainly is, and I guess that at the end of the day, you know, defense is the best offense, and we're all going to have to be personally responsible for educating ourselves and making sure at least we can do what we need to do to protect ourselves. Tall task for some of us, Rod. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We all have to be IT experts. Now, the White House is looking to put a political firestorm behind it this week to add to the many things it has to worry about. That may be easier said than done, though. President Trump is facing a growing backlash over his decision to fire James Comey just 6 days ago. We are waiting to hear who the president nominates as his replacement. And there are stunning new comments from a former director of national intelligence about the damage President Trump is doing to American democracy. The controversy is overshadowing Mr. Trump's first foreign visit as president. Joe Johns has more on the challenges he's facing at home.
The fallout over President Trump's firing of FBI Director James Comey isn't going away.
I think in many ways our institutions are under assault, both externally, and that's the big news here, is the Russian interference in our election system. And I think as well our institutions are under assault internally.
Internally from the president?
Exactly.
The nation's former intelligence chief, James Clapper, suggesting President Trump is undermining America's democratic system.
The founding fathers, in their genius, created a system of three co-equal branches of government and a built-in system of checks and balances. And I feel as though that's under assault and is eroding.
Clapper also rejecting the president's repeated use of his Senate testimony to dismiss the Russia investigation.
So the bottom line is, I don't know if there was collusion, political collusion, and I don't know of any evidence to it. So I can't refute it, and I can't confirm it.
United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley coming to the president's defense, while White House aides avoided the Sunday shows.
The president is the CEO of the country. He can hire and fire whoever he wants.
Lawmakers from both parties condemning the president's action and demanding an explanation of the president's threatening tweet suggesting that recordings may exist of his conversations with Comey. The White House denies the tweet was a threat.
It was inappropriate. I would advise the president not to tweet or comment about the investigation.
If, in fact, there are such recordings, I think those recordings will be subpoenaed.
We want to make sure those tapes are preserved because we're going to want to take a look at them in Congress.
The top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee asserting that Comey should have the opportunity to address the president's allegations in public.
I think Jim Comey deserves his chance to lay out to the American public his side of the facts because how he was treated was pretty awful by this president.
Some Democrats now saying they will refuse to confirm a new FBI director until a special prosecutor is appointed.
I thought that this would be a very popular thing that I did when I terminated Comey, because all of the Democrats couldn't stand him. But because I terminated him, they said, we get some political points, we'll go against Trump.
President Trump insisting that an independent investigation is not necessary.
There is no collusion. We had nothing to do with Russia and everything else.
The backlash coming as the president scrambles to replace Comey.
I think the process is going to go quickly.
A decision could come this week after 8 candidates were interviewed by Attorney General Jeff Sessions and his deputy over the weekend. Lawmakers from both parties urging the president to look beyond Washington when selecting a new director.
I would strongly urge the administration to pick someone who is completely apolitical.
The president has a chance to clean up the mess that he mostly created.
A lot is riding on Donald Trump's pick for the next FBI director. CNN senior political analyst Ron Brownstein is in Washington with more. Ron, I just want to touch on something that's so striking when you're listening to Joe John's report there. It's a completely different reality. When you listen to Clapper and some members of Congress, they feel that the American institutions, the systems of checks and balances is under threat. When you listen to people in the Trump administration, they think, you know, he can fire whoever he wants. He's the CEO of the country. And, you know, I thought it was going to be popular. And this is all political games, you know, that this doesn't rise anywhere to the level of, these are two completely different narratives.
And it is the fissure that is rapidly widening not only in Washington, but in American society as this core question that was kind of under the surface during the campaign comes to a head, I think, faster than anyone could have imagined, which is, as James Clapper argued, whether the president is a threat to the basic democratic checks and balances, because the firing of Comey has to be seen as part of a continuum of events that ranges from attacks on, quote, the fake news, unquote, to, quote, so-called judges, unquote, to firing Sally Yates and Preet Bharara while they're investigating people in his orbit. All of these, I think, Maggie, raise the fear that the president is systematically determined to weaken, if not delegitimize, any institution that he feels could stand up to him. And that, I think, is going to be a front and center issue, I think, with increasing urgency as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent way to put it, Ron, and I think you're exactly right. That is how people are feeling. Regardless of where you are on the spectrum and how you feel about Donald Trump as president, can this White House, this administration, hit the reset button? Is there someone they can nominate to start with for the FBI that can start to move past this and restore order and some sense of confidence in the system, even if it doesn't improve his personal likability as president? Can they reset here?
I don't think they can entirely reset, right? Because no matter who they appoint, no matter how well-credentialed or well-respected that person is, the new FBI director will be coming into office fully aware that their predecessor was dismissed by the president's own words, in part because, excuse me, he was dissatisfied and uneasy about the investigation into the Russian role in the 2016 election. That can't be erased. That shadow can't be removed. And that's why I think that, yes, a good appointment can provide some relief, but I think the question of how and why Comey was dismissed is not going to go away no matter who the president selects to replace him.
There are still, the more they don't talk to the press, you heard only a few coming out really publicly this weekend, the more rumors fester. There are talk of mass firings, about what's going to happen next, about a president that's furious from a personal level and obsessed with this. Do you think any of that rings true? Who are the calmer voices within the White House that may redirect? We have a very important week with very important international meetings and issues that are rising up around the world.
So look, I mean, this is a president who has shown no hesitation about dismissing his staff before when things are going badly. And certainly things are going badly. I mean, his approval rating, as we've talked about many times before, is significantly below any other president at this point in their tenure. The legislative agenda is kind of very uncertain. Parts of it are moving forward. Parts of it are stalled. They are making progress on some of the executive activities like rolling back Obama regulations, but all of it is deeply controversial. I think the key here is how long do congressional Republicans believe that their interests are served by primarily encircling and kind of, circling the wagons around President Trump and defending him at all costs. Because on the one hand, he retains significant support among the Republican base. On the other hand, he's looking at an approval rating under 40% among independents, under 40% among college-educated white voters, and most of the vulnerable Republicans in 2018 are in these white-collar suburban districts that have a lot of both. And I do think, as I've said to you before, the biggest risk for Republicans in 2018 is that large portion of the electorate that is at best ambivalent about President Trump. Many of his voters in 2016 were ambivalent about him. Will they feel that Republicans are exercising sufficient oversight, acting as a check, or will they ultimately believe, voters who usually vote Republican, will they believe they need a Democratic Congress to provide more of a check on a president they are ambivalent about? That is the biggest risk, and I think Republicans are compounding that risk by essentially abandoning the oversight function to a large extent through these tumultuous first months.
Yes, so tumultuous is putting it lightly. I think, Ron, extraordinary events happening in D.C. Thank you for helping us understand them a little bit better. Ron Brownstein for us. Well, we have news just in from Paris. The president has just named this man his prime minister. Stay with us. We'll be live in Paris for the details.
He's one of the youngest billionaires in the world. And he's engaged to supermodel Miranda Kerr. Evan Spiegel's stake in Snapchat hit $6 billion the day its parent company IPO'd. It gained fame as the disappearing message app, but now Snap is calling itself a camera company, also making spectacles for snapping videos on the go. Spiegel quit university before getting a degree, so he could set up Snapchat with co-founder Bobby Murphy, just months before his 21st birthday. It was such a success that Facebook reportedly offered to buy it in 2013 for $3 billion. But Snapchat said no. Now they have over 100 million users every day. And what started as a disappearing picture app will soon be a fixture on the New York Stock Exchange. And that's Evan Spiegel in 60 seconds.
An island paradise, known for its bounty of beautiful beaches. But there's much more to the Philippines. Come with us to explore ancient customs and new flavors. Gaze at the curious and the spectacular. We're island hopping to seek out the country's hidden treasures. Destination Philippines. Saturday on CNN.
Sunday on CNN. Get a jump on the U.S. political scene with Inside Politics.
The Republican president threatened to oppose members of his own party.
Then State of the Union with Jake Tapper.
Should President Trump apologize to President Obama and to the American people?
Fareed Zakaria, GPS.
We are living through a sea change in politics.
And Connect the World with Becky Anderson.
With respect, sir, let me just stop you there for one moment. That is not the government.
Sunday on CNN.
The new French president is hitting the ground running. Emmanuel Macron has packed schedule on his first full day in office. He has just named his pick for prime minister. It is Edouard Philippe, a member of the center-right Republican Party. President Macron was just sworn in yesterday. He will shortly be off to Berlin to meet German Chancellor Angela Merkel. He has already vowed to push ahead with reforms to spur economic growth and loosen up the French labor market. One man who will be watching this all very closely is Olivier Marchal. He is the chairman at management consulting firm Bain & Company in France, and he joins us live from Paris. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm curious, he is headed straight off to Germany. No surprise there, I suppose. Will Macron get the help he needs from his European partners?
Well, I think it's a very good sign and a very good symbolic sign for Macron on the first day after his election to go to Germany and meet with Angela Merkel. As you know, she's favored in the polls in Germany, and that could be the basis for not only a strong dialogue, but a new rejuvenated relationship between France and Germany, and therefore good hopes for a new momentum and impetus for the European construction.
Absolutely. The strengthening of the core, I suppose you could say. I know so many, we've been hearing from business leaders already, and so many of them are very concerned about Macron delivering on his promises, getting that much-needed reform through. What are his chances of doing that? How important are these parliamentary elections?
Well, very important. But first of all, I think the main point today is that, you know, the business community at large is in a sentiment, positive sentiment regarding the future. We have a young new leader, the youngest since Napoleon. He's got a reasonably pro-business agenda and program. So I think there's, you know, optimism in the business community. But as you rightly mentioned, we have a parliament election in a few weeks' time that actually is going to decide whether Macron will be able to reform and conduct the program that the French economy badly needed.
You know, there have been some signs that the French economy is improving. Will a rising economy help him get some of these important reforms through, especially when it comes to the labor market?
Yeah, absolutely. There are two ways to respond to that. I think, first of all, it's true that the French economy is showing, you know, good signs in terms of growth, in terms of employment, and that could make his plan for reforms easier to implement. At the same time, he shouldn't be too complacent about the current state of the economy. The economy still needs economic reforms, structural reforms, and the current, you know, positives of the economy should not slow down the pace of reform that is needed.
Olivier, always wonderful to catch up with you, and nice to hear that hopeful tone coming from the business community. Olivier Marchal for us. Now, European stocks are little changed this Monday as President Macron gets down to business. That said, his victory has been a profitable one for investors. Stocks in the region recently hit 21-month highs. The euro has been trading at 6-month highs. Here on Wall Street, stocks are set for a flat to modestly higher open. Shares of internet security firms, as you can imagine, are set to rally following the global cyber attack. And oil stocks are set to rise after today's spike in the price of oil. We'll have much more on that in just a few minutes. And we are just moments away from the start of a new session right here at the New York Stock Exchange. Trading is about to begin. We'll bring you the opening bell.
The fish are eating. So should you, anak.
Thank you.
You're welcome, anak.
What does anak mean? It means my child.
You have every provision of this bill tattooed on your forehead.
Tuesday, Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democratic opposition in the House, Chris Cuomo moderates a live CNN town hall. Tuesday on CNN.
Wednesday, Bernie Sanders, John Kasich. They battled in the Congress for years. Now they face off on CNN. Jake Tapper and Dana Bash moderate a live CNN debate. Wednesday, only on CNN.
Because leaving home doesn't mean living less. Stay at a hotel that has the news source you trust.
stay at a CNN partner hotel.
You have every provision of this bill tattooed on your forehead.
Tuesday, Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democratic opposition in the House, Chris Cuomo moderates a live CNN town hall. Tuesday on CNN.
Join me, Kate Baldwin, for the latest in U.S. politics. We have smart discussions and a whole lot of fun.
State of America, Tuesday through Friday on CNN. And get more State of America on the new podcast. Subscribe now with your favorite app.
This is CNN.
Opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange, beginning of a new session and a new week, and you can see we are in positive territory right out of the gate with a gain of a little over 0.1%. You are watching CNN Money. I'm Maggie Lake. We'll get back to business news in just a moment. First, here are the top world news stories we are following. Europol says attempts to contain the world's biggest cyber attacks seem to be working. The WannaCry ransomware hit at least 150 countries over the weekend. It locked computers used by government agencies, private companies, even hospitals, and demanded payment. Europol says it hasn't identified who is responsible. The North Korean ambassador to China says his country will continue its missile tests anytime and anywhere. Pyongyang tested a missile Sunday that it says can carry a nuclear warhead. The North is now warning the U.S. not to provoke it, claiming its missiles are within range of U.S. territory. Donald Trump says he hopes to pick a new FBI director by Friday. It's been less than a week since he fired James Comey, and now some leading Senate Democrats say they will refuse to confirm a replacement until a special prosecutor is named to head the Russian probe. Oil prices are getting a boost after a major agreement to extend production cuts. This is how the market's doing right now. Countries including Saudi Arabia and Russia agreed to limit output until March of next year to try to stabilize prices. John Defterios is in Abu Dhabi with more. And so, John, how significant is this announcement?
Well, it's a pretty major move, Maggie, to have the #1 and #2 producers around the world come together and put out such a bold statement at this time, 10 days before that meeting that you suggested taking place in Vienna. I also thought it was a bit unusual. They decided to pick it and make that announcement at the Silk Road Summit being hosted by Xi Jinping. So a very formal summit about trade, and they put out a statement about oil prices. Some would suggest even it's a sign of desperation, but Xi Jinping and China is a big customer for both Russia and Saudi Arabia. You can recall back in December that Khalid al-Faleh, the Saudi minister, and Alexander Novak, his Russian counterpart, are the two that came together and then brought 22 other producers around the table to get this agreement to cut 1.8 million barrels a day. Back in November, I looked at it today, Maggie, we were at $44 a barrel. We spiked up to $56 a barrel. But right now, these two parties are struggling to keep a floor of $50 a barrel. And that's why they wanted to send such a strong statement to the markets. Let's take a look at the actual statement itself. I think it says quite a bit. We've come to the conclusion that an agreement needs to be extended, the two parties suggested, and this was written by a spokesman. The two ministers agreed to do whatever it takes to achieve the desired goal of trying to stabilize the market. But Maggie, this is a very tricky game. Saudi Arabia and Russia trying to bring the other producers to roll over the agreement to the first quarter of 2018. But in essence, it means that two major players are becoming the swing producers. So if the U.S. production continues to rise, #1 and #2 have to cut to make room for that production. Otherwise, that floor of $50 a barrel is under threat, Maggie.
Yeah, I mean, this is the question, John. If they continue to cut back, doesn't that mean the U.S. producers just step up and fill the gap?
And that's the problem they're having. Khalid al-Faleh, the Saudi minister, as I was suggesting, told us at a CNN Money Roundtable back in January, he's not losing sleep over the U.S. shale producers. They know that the producers in the U.S. will recover. They're trying to cap some of the more expensive production. But here are the numbers and how it adds up, Maggie. The 24 producers, including Saudi Arabia and Russia, want to cut 1.8 million barrels a day by the end of the first half of 2017. U.S. recovery has been 1 million barrels a day in the last year. Then you have two other countries like Nigeria and Libya bouncing back faster than expected. So while the countries are covering 1.8 million barrels a day, they're almost treading water as a result of this. And I also think it's very important to keep in mind, why is Saudi Arabia making such an effort here to pull this all together before the OPEC, non-OPEC meeting May 25th? They want to float Saudi Aramco in 2018. So you notice the language, carry through to March 2018 with agreement. If they can get this price firmly above $50 a barrel, $55 to $60 a barrel, it gives them a much better valuation. They try to go for $2 trillion in 2018. If you have an oil price that's south of $50 a barrel, that's going to be very difficult to achieve. So the Saudis know it. Russia needs at least $50 a barrel. So a big push before that OPEC meeting in Vienna, Maggie.
The pressure is on, that is for sure, in a very changing landscape. John, thanks so much. John Defterios. Now, Donald Trump is placing the Middle East at the top of his agenda as he begins a foreign diplomatic offensive. Today, he will host the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, one of the region's key politicians, at the White House. Their meeting comes days after the two countries agreed on a $2 billion arms sale. And later this week, Mr. Trump will make Saudi Arabia the first stop on his overseas trip as president. Rana Foroohar is our global economic analyst and is also a columnist for the Financial Times. She joins me now. Rana, so many important things happening this week,
yes.
Not only with the Middle East, but with what's going on in North Korea. Let me ask you, President Trump on the international stage, as he embarks on this important trip, is his credibility damaged by the controversy at home?
You know, I think his credibility is damaged on the global stage for sure. In the Middle East, though, and particularly with the Saudis, I think they're probably going to welcome him with open arms. You know, I mean, he's doing a lot of business. There's a $100 billion arms deal going through. The Saudis are actually offering to invest in U.S. infrastructure, which is something that Trump very much wants to bolster growth, and that's something he needs in the next 2 years before the midterm elections. I think that the Middle East, there's no accident that he chose this first. I think that's going to be a real softball play for him, actually.
Which, you know, you could argue might help. There's been an awful lot of negative press. No matter how you try to construct these things, though, Rana, events happen. We've already seen North Korea launch another missile. How is that going to affect the calculations within the White House?
So the situation in Asia is a lot more complicated for Trump and for the U.S. There's a new president in South Korea. Obviously, this missile launch is, you know, yet another sort of punctuation of the threats that we've seen in that region. What's interesting is that the geopolitics of Asia seem to be changing pretty radically in the last few months. You're seeing South Korea now with its new president getting closer to China. This is a president that actually campaigned on the idea of standing up to America, being able to say no to America. So you might see a tighter alliance between the Chinese and the South Koreans. It's going to be interesting to see how the U.S. fits into that calculation. Both the Chinese and the U.S. have a big interest in curbing North Korea. But I think that Trump's policies around North Korea have been pretty short-sighted. He's looking at it as a very short-term threat, the kind perhaps that Syria poses, rather than a kind of a multi-year, multifactorial threat. And I think that that's something that the Chinese and the South Koreans are very aware of.
Can this trip in some way help bolster the president? As I said, it's been tough going in the wake of the Comey firing. But I heard some interesting commentary saying for all the heated rhetoric on the campaign trail, as he methodically makes his way meeting these foreign leaders, some of the rhetoric about trade and trade wars has really fallen by the wayside. He does seem to, on an individual bilateral basis, be able to do business, to make deals, to make some progress with countries. Can that help?
Well, it's interesting, and it's a big question how much progress he's making. You know, you see the new supposedly Herculean deal, you know, as the FT wrote today, not being so much of a Herculean deal. You know, this is basically a rehash deal. The Chinese are making good on promises that they've made for a long time. So I think how much Trump has achieved in trade is, you know, big questions around that. What's interesting is there's a lot of flack now at home, even as maybe business leaders abroad are a little bit more able to do business with the president. There's a lot of rhetoric at home from business leaders saying, hey, where's the growth? You know, where are all the things that we were promised? So it's interesting. You know, if he's gaining points abroad, he may be losing them in the business community at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people keeping a close eye on whether that agenda does get held up, especially when it comes to tax reform. Rana, always great to catch up with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Still ahead, China pitches a grand plan on the world stage, but could it be overshadowed by events in North Korea?
An island paradise, known for its bounty of beautiful beaches. But there's much more to the Philippines. Come with us to explore ancient customs and new flavors. Gaze at the curious and the spectacular. We're island hopping to seek out the country's hidden treasures. Destination Philippines, Saturday on CNN.
Next time on Vital Signs, unlocking stem cells' potential all over the world, from Europe to the United States.
You inject them in a heart, they learn from the living heart cells what to become. If you inject them in a knee, they become cartilage.
See the impact these experimental studies could have on the treatment of autism.
Before this study, autism affected probably 75% of our day, and now autism maybe affects 10%.
Vital Signs, Wednesday on CNN, in association with Dubai Healthcare City.
This whole journey that I've taken goes back to what I grew up with. Filipino hospitality has to do with always wanting to nurture and to feed. Every part of the Philippines has this wealth of not only ingredients, but cooking styles that just says so much about how rich the cuisine is.
Culinary Journeys, Thursday on CNN. Go inside the world of horse racing on CNN's Winning Post.
This month we're at America's greatest race, the Kentucky Derby, here at Churchill Downs.
Sunday on CNN, in association with Longines.
North Korea's ambassador to China says the North will continue to carry out missile tests anytime and anywhere Kim Jong-un wants. Pyongyang tested a missile Sunday that it says can carry a nuclear warhead, but the launch could strain relations between North Korea and China. The test is overshadowing China's big moment on the world stage right now, the One Belt, One Road summit. Dozens of world leaders and high-level officials showed up to Beijing's answer to the G20 summit, or Davos. Among the big names, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Let's bring in David McKenzie, who is in Beijing. And David, the intention here was really to highlight China's increasing desire to be certainly a world leader and an economic leader.
Well, that's right. It was on some level overshadowed by that test in North Korea. Despite the fact that a North Korean delegation was invited to this summit, they went ahead and tested their missile anyway. So it would have been embarrassing for the Chinese. But I think the Chinese president really wanted to keep the focus here on this massive summit. Some 29 world leaders and other leaders were here to see the unveiling, as it were, of Xi Jinping's plan that they call the One Belt, One Road plan, that really is, they say, a plan for the century.
It's really nice, actually.
Lamb with cumin.
It's good. It's hot. Yeah. Thank you.
Pomegranate juice and flatbread. The tastes in Xi'an's popular Muslim quarter tell a story.
Xi'an was always the link between East and West. That's right. That's right.
Its city walls draw tourists to the crossroads of ancient Silk Road trade. In modern China, Xi'an has been neglected. But officials hope that a new free trade zone here will change that. We are building a gateway to the West, he says. I'm sure this China-Europe freight train service will cement our trade with Europe.
These goods will be placed on this train and then shipped as far afield as Hamburg in Germany by rail. The new Silk Road is an extraordinarily ambitious move by China to expand its global trade.
Targeting 68 countries across the globe with at least $500 billion in Chinese investment. The Belt and Road Initiative is a mega infrastructure and trade project. Conspicuously not on the list, the United States.
But the United States hasn't joined the initiative.
Is that because it's too far away?
Actually, any country can join, anywhere.
In a relentless PR push like these bedtime stories on China Daily, China is trying to highlight its benevolent aims. But some see the Communist Party trying to create a new world order. Much of the plan is still only on paper. From Xi'an, the train to Europe is still not as fast as air cargo, not as cheap as sea freight. For now, their e-commerce hub operates on a very modest scale. We want to expand both exports and imports, he says. And if history is anything to go by, the world's future could have a decidedly Chinese flavor.
Well, to put this in perspective, China is estimating there could be about $1 trillion in infrastructure spend and in trade spend, according to this new Silk Road plan. Again, it seems like an umbrella sort of plan. Some economists saying that the countries to the west of China in Central Asia don't necessarily have the capacity to bring in those projects, but China certainly plowing ahead and trying to get partners to develop what appears to be an attempt to shift the global hub of trade eastwards.
Interesting stuff. David, first of all, I have to commend you, because that last thing had way too many legs for me to feel comfortable taking a brave bite of, but you seem to be forging right ahead. But in all seriousness, as I'm watching this, everyone I have talked to who are China watchers has made so much of the fact that China is really in this very long-term attempt to pivot its economy to a more service-oriented, innovative, high-tech economy, kind of wean itself off that reliance on industry and on government fueled spending. And this seems to be so much centered on that sort of, traditional trade-based, export-based economy.
Well, I think it's a very good point you raised, Maggie. And yes, I mean, a lot of the projects that are ongoing for this that have been highlighted are ports, are train station, train rail links, and it's really what China has been known as traditionally as a leader in expanding infrastructure, in pushing trade on that kind of scale. But there is a lot of talk within this One Belt, One Road system that they want to try bring e-commerce, transnational trade, they want to bring innovation as well. When you see the list of aspects that they bring to this in their speeches and otherwise, it really sort of encompasses any kind of trade, innovation, and business. So it at times seems sort of even too ambitious. But yes, they do feel they want to make this the new kind of Chinese growth. One very important point, I think, to put across that we showed in that story there is this is as much about trying to boost economic growth in the western parts of China that has fallen behind, Shanghai and other places that have had long ties to international trade. China wants to kind of push that development to the west to catch up and keep the growth going within China. So this is as much a kind of political move domestically by the Communist Party as it is trying to push trade internationally. Maggie?
Which I think is where the worry is. If it's done wisely, it could be just the hand of government, but that's also where in the States we have an expression, a bridge to nowhere. Sometimes politics doesn't dictate the most economically efficient thing to do. We'll have to see where they come down on this. David, thank you so much. David McKenzie. Now, Beijing is also offering loans for infrastructure in Africa. China has the resources to fund projects on a scale that many African governments simply cannot manage on their own. One of those mega projects is nearing completion in Kenya. Take a look.
It's a towering achievement. Kenya's standard gauge railway. Built and 90% financed by the Chinese, it will run almost 300 miles from the port city of Mombasa to the capital, Nairobi, with plans to connect Kenya to 6 other East African countries. It's the country's largest investment since independence in 1963, and it's being called a game changer, replacing the more than 100-year-old colonial-built line. It's planned to take half the load coming through East Africa's largest port, which currently travels down a slow and congested 2-lane highway. For now, all tracks lead to here, to Nairobi's brand new terminal, which will become operational this June. They hope that it will open up the East African markets, but it has come with its own share of controversy. For one, there is a $3.8 billion price tag, which is 6% of Kenya's GDP. It's a massive risk, which they hope will pay off.
That's what people are saying. Look, this is a very big bet that you've taken in comparison to your economy. I think that, you know, there will be a very strong return from this investment, but obviously it has been expensive.
Kenyan officials involved in the project did not respond to CNN's request for comment. Chinese authorities referred us to Chinese headquarters, which did not respond either. Chinese presence on the continent has seen allegations of corruption, an over-reliance on Chinese labor at the expense of African labor, and a lack of transparency. But the company behind the project, State-backed China Road and Bridge Corporation, or CRBC, employed 25,000 locals on this railway. And for environmentalists protesting the effects on wildlife, CRBC have designed wildlife corridors. Locals, though, appreciate the dependable construction.
They're the best. We have had a lot of problems with the African contractors, stealing shoulder works, but now with the Chinese, they are doing good. They are doing extremely good work.
There's been a dramatic change. Africans saw China as Santa Claus. You want a stadium? You got it. What else do you want? You got it. I don't think the days of, you know, that enormous largesse are there anymore. They still have the capacity to do big things, but they're going to make sure their interests are covered.
While this infrastructure presents a massive economic potential for Kenyans, it's up to them what they do with it. Because in the end, it's not aid the Chinese are providing, it's business. Farai Sevenzo, CNN, Nairobi.
Still ahead, Saturday Night Live Spice Girl returns. Melissa McCarthy sends up all the latest drama at the White House. We'll take a look.
ISIS is shooting from areas that have civilians in them.
A lot of coalition planning, American air power.
This is basically what is left of rebel-held Aleppo.
Tens of thousands of people who have already been displaced.
The battle still rages all around us.
It's less than a mile to safety. We're lucky. We can leave the combat zone.
Our planet's future hangs in the balance. We need to find solutions for Earth's big issues. Solutions to fight deforestation, to produce renewable energy, to clean our oceans and air, and solutions to revitalize our cities.
On Eco Solutions, we talk to people who are taking steps to help balance our environmental challenges and who show us how to make better choices every day.
Eco Solutions, Saturday on CNN.
Passion is something that drives you, that lights a fire inside you. And when you mix it with commitment and talent, you can create anything. On Passion to Portfolio, we turn the spotlight on people with this passion. Ones on the front lines of power and celebrity, harnessing their talents to build a portfolio. Entrepreneurs, artists and innovators, making it in a global marketplace. Passion to Portfolio, Tuesday on CNN.
Bloggers and vloggers have become real fashion icons for millions of young people around the world. Most of them are based in the U.S. or Europe. But one Indian entrepreneur with a keen eye for traditional design discovered a niche market and founded a business.
No matter where I am, at work or with my friends or, even hanging out with family, I see that everyone around me is completely consumed by fashion, and I love it. I'm Masu Meenawala Mehta. I'm 24 years old. I'm a fashion blogger and the CEO of Style Fiesta. I launched my brand Style Fiesta because I saw this massive dearth in amazing international trends, especially in the accessory market in India. I saw that young women in our country were always referring to the Western side for inspiration. Everybody was following international bloggers. I was like, why don't we have somebody in our country whose life could obviously be a lot more relatable, And I just consider myself lucky to be one of the first few to kick it off in India. Style Fiesta has been very successful over the years. We started with a temporary trial blog shop with only 30 products. And at the moment, we're selling 10,000s of products all across different portals. We're also exploring launching new categories as we speak. We're now manufacturing our own products in India. The most incredible part of working from India and catering to India is that it's such a rapidly growing market. There's so much opportunity everywhere. We're finally accepting our Indian culture when it comes to fashion. And it's lovely to just watch our heritage fashion, you know, whether it's our Rajasthani jewels or whether it's Banarasi saris that are coming back. And that being infused with a modern twist. I think it's very important to really accept our culture and to keep engaging with it.
Live from New York, it's Sean Spicer. Well, kind of. Actress Melissa McCarthy reprised her role as the White House press secretary on Saturday Night Live over the weekend, taking on some of the issues that have surfaced in recent days. Here's a look.
Now, I'm filling in for Sean today. As you know, Sean is fulfilling his duty as an officer in the Naval Reserve, and that is why he cannot be here.
I'm pretty sure I can see him hiding in those bushes.
That's a naval exercise. He's trying to blend in with his surroundings. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you just do this full time instead of him?
If he's your friend, why is everyone saying he's about to fire you and replace you with Sarah?
Oh, bless your heart. This is the first I'm hearing of that.
Get out. I gotta fight Trump. I'm going to New York. The press interview is over.
Oh, we had a lot of fun watching her ride around New York City. Now, before we leave you, let's check in on the latest market action here on Wall Street. We are seeing green arrows across the board for stocks in early trading. You can see blue chips up very nicely, 72 points, and NASDAQ just hit another record high, and oil stocks are rallying amid a big jump in crude prices. Shares of leading cybersecurity firms are leading the way higher as experts battle the global ransomware attack. California-based Symantec is currently up by over 4%, one of the day's early winners. And that is it for this edition of CNN Money. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next time.